Hi, everyone, and welcome to another evening of 929 with Rachel Danziger. We're always happy to have her as a teacher here at Mayan. This is her last class she's in Boston, but God willing, she's moving back to Israel this summer. It'll happen, and once she settles in, we'll be getting Rachel to come teach for us over Zoom and continue the 929 program and some other classes. We hope to have her. So we're taking a break for September and probably October with the 929 class. And then, God willing, we'll be resuming either at the end of October or beginning of November. But it will be switching to a daytime so that we don't have to keep Rachel up in the middle of the night. And hopefully she'll be unjet lagged by then. But we are once again pleased to have Rachel, one of our favorite teachers. All our teachers are our favorite, but it's just special to have Rachel continue with, I think we're on the 19th or 20th 929 session. So learning about the last prophets. So take it away, Rachel.
Thank you, Ilana. I just wanted to say 2 words. It's very emotional for me. Even though we're all going, even though I'm still going to be teaching this class, it's still an emotional thing for me to teach it for the last time from, well, not the coffee place where we started 19 meetings ago, and not Young Israel Brookline to where we moved once the group swelled, but still from Boston proper. So, and it also feels especially appropriate to teach this particular class as my last Boston located class, because just as I am standing in front of facing a big change, on the brink of a big change in locations and circumstances, our class today focuses on prophets that enter the stage at a moment of a vast change. And to understand how deep this change goes, let's go back for a second to the beginning of the prophets. The first prophets we saw were not prophets that had books named after them. The first prophets we saw were prophets like Shmuel, for example, people who God instructed to instruct the king. Then we saw various other prophets like that. We saw Natan and God guiding David HaMelech. We saw Achiyah HaShiloni telling Yerovam to tear part of the kingdom away and start the northern kingdom of Israel. But all those prophets were part of the greater story. They were not the central movers and shakers, perhaps with the exception of Shmuel. Then with Yeshayahu, Yirmiyahu, and Yechezkel, we entered a new chapters. We entered what sometimes is called Nevi'ei HaSefer, the prophets of the book. The prophets that created enough of a canon, enough of a impact to have their own books of collected prophecies. And all of them, without exception until now, were constantly warning the Israelites and the Judeans, back when it was still 2 kingdoms, about everything they stand to lose if they continue straying from the right way, from the right path. If they continue behaving in, dabbling in idolatry, dabbling in social injustice, dabbling in murder, dabbling in treaties with problematic countries, in exploitation, etc., and sexual promiscuity. All of them were focused on, we have this temple, we have this life, we have these kingdoms, and this is what we stand to lose. Even when we already saw the end, when with Yirmiyahu we witnessed the destruction, or with Yechezkel we witnessed it already from exile, the focal point of the prophecy was still what we're losing. But today we're entering the last phase in prophecy, in the history of prophecy altogether. And this phase has a different focal point. It's no longer about imminent and happening destruction. It's no longer about the temple that is about to be destroyed. It's about the new temple that is supposed to replace what was lost. Instead of focusing on the danger of loss, we're focusing on the need and the challenges of new beginning. And this is a totally different ballgame. We see it as soon as we enter Chagai, the first of these trio, Chagai, Zechariah, and Malachi, the first chronologically, I mean. And we see it as soon as we start the book. Let's look here in the source sheet, box number 1. Beshnat Shtayim leDaryavesh HaMelech, in the second year of King Darius. So already here we see a difference. We're no longer talking about a reality where the big empire is Syria or Babylon. We're talking about a time when the big empire is Persia. And before we delve into the text, I want to say a few words about that, because we may think, oh, what's a big deal? We had Assyria, we had Babylon, and now we have a new northern empire, Persia. But the truth is that Persia is inherently different. Because if the previous empires we met ruled by eradicating the local power, by installing their own men sometimes, but then eventually destroying, exiling, rearranging. With Assyria, we see that it was a matter of policy, taking people from one area and moving them to another area. With Babylon, it was more that they let people keep their own land as long as they were totally docile. But the second that no longer worked, they just exiled them altogether. But the main, should I say, apparatus of governance in those empires was breaking the local powers to the point that they could no longer object. Persia takes over in 539 BCE. There's a big battle, and Cyrus the Great, Koresh from our history, takes over what used to be Babylon. And he is ruling in a totally different way. He is propping up the local powers, and he's allowing them to rule themselves somewhat independently under two conditions. I'm being a little bit disingenuous. It's not exactly two, but two main conditions. One, of course, that in all external matters, they are loyal to the empire. They pay taxes. They wouldn't take arms against the empire. No less important from Persian perspective, they will house and feed Persian soldiers as they are marching on way to this campaign or that campaign. And also, and that's important also, the Persians expected every one of those vassals, every one of those local governments to have a clear written code of law, a clear, well-defined religion and religious center, and a clear system of local governance. Who is the elite that rules, etc., etc. It's no wonder that in the Persian era we have the writing of the biblical canon. It's no wonder that in the Persian era we talk about Ezra HaSofer, Ezra the scribe, because the Persian system was founded on local authorities that have everything in writing and coded and can hold the people accountable, but also be held accountable by the central authority. And within this new context, King Cyrus the Great famously has this proclamation allowing the Jews, and here I'm already moving from speaking about Israelites to talking about Jews, because we're talking about the Judean exiles, to come back to Judea and rebuild the temple. And it's not something unusual. It's exactly in line with his general policy. He wants them to be in their land, with their religious center, with their code of law. You'd think it's an easy thing. You'd think, oh, great, we lost the temple, we suffered exile, let's go back. But the truth is that from the moment King Cyrus makes this proclamation until the moment they start rebuilding the temple, we have at least over a decade. And the question is why? The question is, what is holding them back? And I would like to put this question to you. And it's not a question of knowledge in the sense that I'm not asking you to go back in your mind over what you know about what's called Shivat Zion, the return to Zion in the days of the Persian Empire, but rather I'd like you to go back to your own memories, to try and remember a new beginning, a moment when you had to rebuild after something was taken from you, after something was lost, after a certain opportunity you wanted was foreclosed for you. and you had to start fresh. What are the challenges? What are the difficulties involved in such an endeavor? And I'm sorry, I know it's a private kind of question, but we're in a somewhat intimate setting. I hope someone will be willing to share.
You have to reevaluate your own identity. Who are you going to be in this new iteration?
Can you elaborate on that? In what way are you not the same person? What do you mean?
If you've lost something that is has been vital to your understanding of yourself, then you are entering a new stage of self. And who is that person? It's not the same person.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about something similar when we talked about exile in one of our classes. And we talked about how it's like you're in a new skin and you suddenly don't know how to act and how to be because all the things that were obvious and natural for you before are no longer there. So in a sense, renewal, we talked like that about exile, but also coming back to the land of Israel and rebuilding, emphasizing the going back to something you had before. For the people actually doing that, they're not the people. Most of them didn't live at the time of the first temple. Most of them lived in Babylon with the experience of exile, and now they're coming to do something that they, as you say, need to reinvent themselves for, or rediscover themselves for. Anybody else wants to add? I can't tell. Just please speak up.
I think it makes you very, very vulnerable, and you're exposing your vulnerability, and you have to be willing to take a lot of chances. And things that you thought that you could succeed in before, and you didn't, all of a sudden you have to put the energies towards either trying again or trying to figure out a new way to succeed. And it's a lot of commitment of energy and the self to an endeavor that may or may not work again.
If you don't mind, Naomi, I'd like to unpack it for 3 distinct points I'm hearing. Tell me if I'm misunderstanding you. I'm hearing one that you're saying that sometimes the confidence is shattered. Your confidence is shattered because whatever you did before didn't work. You failed. So whether it's you as a person or you as a nation, something didn't work, and now you have to somehow find within yourself the strength to restart. That's number one. But also you're saying 2 other things. You're saying that when we try, we expose ourselves to the possibility of failure. There's a certain vulnerability in that. And you have to figure out how to go about it. It's a difficult endeavor. How do you even make it happen? All of which I think are connected, but are also valid points. And all of them we will see popping up in different prophets. So we'll get to that. Would anybody else like to add something? Please speak up if you do, because I can't see everyone at once on the Zoom. Okay, so let's keep talking. But if you want to stop me at some point, and
was muted.
Sorry.
This is Chaya here, and I was thinking that when you have a new beginning, you have to define what it is that you want to build. Will it be a replica of the past? Will it be something completely new? Will it be a synthesis? And how do you go about first making the decisions and then the actual rebuilding or the building anew? And that can take time and a lot of introspection.
Yeah, and we'll definitely touch upon that also. That there's a certain difficulty in building something totally new, but there's also a particular difficulty in rebuilding, because the question is, are you trying to replicate? Are you creating something new? How do you even make these decisions? How do you go about it? How are you not paralyzed by the memory of what was? And as we will see, this will be a central theme also in the prophecies that we will look at today. If anybody wants to add something, now's the time. If not, let's keep going and we'll have more time for discussion soon. Anybody? Okay. Let's look at the first prophet we will talk about, Haggai. We already started looking at it in box 1. Let's read quickly through these 2 passages. I'm starting with the opening of his prophecy. In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, this word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah. In the Hebrew, it's Pachat Yehuda, which is the Persian term for the local governor. And to Yoshua, son of Yehozadak, the high priest. Thus said the Lord of hosts. Those people say, the time has not come for rebuilding the house of the Lord. The people are not confident, and at this point, we don't know yet why they feel like it's not the time. But Haggai is about to tackle one of the reasons and argue against it. So let's see what he says in the next verse here in Haggai 1, verse 3. And the word of the Lord through the prophet Haggai continued. Is it a time for you to dwell in your paneled houses? Well, this house is lying in ruins. Now thus said the Lord of hosts, consider how you have been faring. You have sowed much and brought in little. You eat without being satisfied. You drink without getting your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one gets warm. And he who earns anything earns it for a leaky purse. It's a beautiful image that you have a purse, you put it in, and it seems like you have nothing. There's no, it's bottomless, it's bottomless in the sense that you can't retain anything you got. When we look at these words in Haggai, it seems like he's answering his own questions. He's saying, why do you sit at home when the house of God is not built? And then he's saying, nobody has any money. Nobody has anything. They're all living in abject poverty. It seems like he's answering. They're not building it because they don't have the means, because they're barely surviving. It's a very tragic statement if you think about it. If we remember the glory of the first house, if we remember King Shlomo's beautiful building, if we remember all those kings that added to it, all the people who came to it, and now what we're talking about a small group of poor people. Researchers say, in average, we're talking about 41,000 people. That's it. That's all of it. It's like one neighborhood in modern-day Jerusalem. It's not a lot of people. And it wasn't the rich people either. The rich people, the people who went into exile before the temple was destroyed, 11 years earlier, with King Yoachim, the people who Prophet Yechezkel left Judah with, most of them didn't make it back to Israel. Most of them didn't return. Most of them stayed back in Babylon. The people who came were mostly the poor, the people who wanted new opportunities, the people who felt that they couldn't find themselves in Babylon. They're the people who come, and they don't have the means. So what is Haggai about to say about that? Why is he even asking, why can't they build a temple if he knows that they can? But then Haggai says something interesting. He says, I'm looking at verse 7 now. Thus said the Lord of hosts, consider how you have fared. Go up to the hills and get timber and rebuild the house. Then I will look on it with favor and I will be glorified, said the Lord. You have been expecting much and getting little, and when you brought it home, it would blow on you. Because of what, said the Lord of hosts? Because of my house, which lies in ruins, which you all while you all hurry to your own houses. If we look carefully, there's a shift that happens between verses 7 and 8 and verse 9. In verse 7 and 8, it looks as if God is telling them, so what that you're poor? Just take some wood from the hills and build me a house. It doesn't need to be a beautiful house. Don't bother with fancy, expensive materials a la Shlomo HaMelech. Drop it. Just take whatever is there and build it. And indeed, that is what he tells them. He tells them, make it with whatever you have at hand. He's comforting them in a sense, telling them, yes, there's scarcity of means, but what you have is enough. But then he goes one step further in the verse 9 that I just read. He tells them, you are expecting, you are waiting to build the temple because you don't have much. But the reason you don't have much is that you're not building my house. if we look at verse 10, Al ken alechem karu shamayim mital ve'aretz kala yevula. That is why the skies above you have withheld their moisture, and the earth has withheld its yield. This is a revolutionary concept. What he's telling them is, you in your mind think that as long as people don't have means, they can't engage in public works. They can't engage in anything beyond bare-boned survival. But that's not the way the world works. People who engage in things that matter to them as a community, people who go beyond their personal needs, will also get more. In a sense, what he's telling them, and it's very popular today with positive thinking theories and all these mindfulness theories going around, he's telling them you have to change your mindset and then the reality will adjust. He's telling them, forget about Maslow's pyramid of needs. Yes, you're lacking the most basic needs, but don't think that until you get those needs, you can't self-actualize, you can't go beyond that and do finer things. No, do the finer, higher, communal things anyway. And then everything else will come. In a sense, it's almost very modern. If we look, for example, I brought here in box 2, a fragment from an essay called The Scarcity Mindset in Psychology Today. Scarcity is not just a physical limitation. Scarcity affects our thinking and feeling. Scarcity orients the mind automatically and powerfully toward unfulfilled needs. Poverty taxes cognitive resources and causes self-control and failure. The context of scarcity makes you myopic, exhibiting bias towards here and now. The mind is focused on present scarcity. We overvalue immediate benefits at the expense of future ones. And in a sense, Haggai is telling them, don't wait to overcome scarcity in order to overcome this mindset. No, change your mindset and God will help you get everything else you need. And the beautiful thing, the amazing thing, the inspiring thing is that the people take it to heart, and immediately after Haggai makes this proclamation, they go and start rebuilding. But this is not enough. This is, as you mentioned before, when you answered my questions about difficulties, the physical difficulty of doing something is not the only difficulty. The economic difficulty is not the only difficulty. There's a lot of other hindrances. And Haggai, in the second chapter, we only have 2 chapters altogether of Haggai, in the second chapter sets out to deal with or to encourage the people in dealing with another hang-up, one that is hinted in the first prophecy we just read, and that is the fact that they can't help but feel that the new house they're building pales by comparison. Again, if we're imagining the Beit HaMikdash that they lost and the little meager offerings they're able to bring now, how can they not feel repulsed? How can they not feel ashamed of what they have to offer? And Haggai comes and offers them words of encouragement for that. Let's look in, let's skip ahead to box number 4. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Let's skip straight to, we're in Haggai chapter 2. Let's skip straight to verse 6. For thus said the Lord of hosts, in just a little bit, and not a little while longer, I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea and the dry land. I will shake all the nations, and the precious things of all the nations shall come here, and I will fill this house with glory, said the Lord of hosts. Silver is mine, as gold is mine, said the Lord of hosts. The glory of this latter house shall be greater than that of the former one, said the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will grant prosperity, declares the Lord of hosts. So, in a sense, what God is telling them is not only to start, is not only to stop being limited by their feeling that they don't have enough and just do it anyway. He's also reminding them that they're not completing the rebuilding of the temple. Their job is to take the first step. Again, it sounds almost very modern. You know, it's a whole 1,000-mile journey. Starts with one step. Prioritize, break the project into small steps. In fact, when I did some research about scarcity mindset for this lesson, I saw that a lot of psychologists, when they talk about how people in a scarcity of means situation or scarcity of time make bad decisions because they can't prioritize long-term gains over short-term urgency, one of the pieces of advice that recurs in various psychological theories is to break those long-term projects that we have a hard time reaching, we have a hard time prioritizing, into smaller things and try and reach those smaller things. So Haggai is telling them, focus on that. The future will come. The future is on God. God will help you shake everything up and make it as glorious as before. This is not on you. Your job is to lay the foundation. But here I want to turn to you again and say, is that really the only way in which the new temple pales in comparison to the previous one? The gold and the silver and the glory? In what other ways is the reality that the people rebuilding the second temple facing different and deficient compared to the reality in the days of the first temple, in your opinion?
There's no monarchy, no Israel monarchy.
Who is talking? Sorry?
Deb.
Oh, thank you, Deb. Sorry, can't see you.
Okay. There's no monarchy to oversee, do the project management.
Correct. They don't have a monarchy. They don't have sovereignty. They have a governor that's called, what was the word again? And let's see again. Pacha. Just a minute.
Pachat, was it?
Yeah, Pacha. The very first verse of Haggai already gives us a taste of that reality by calling the governor in a Persian term. Pachat, yeah, here. Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, or in Hebrew, Pachat Yehuda, which is a Persian word. So exactly. They don't have sovereignty, they don't have governance. Not only they're lacking the sovereignty to manage their own affairs in terms of planning the temple, it also means that whatever they're doing is only going to serve religious needs. It's not going to mean the same thing. It's not going to be the seat of sovereignty. It's just going to be a religious center. And that's much less than it used to be. In what other ways is it different from the first temple? Any thoughts?
Will the number of people be different?
Yes, the number of people is very different. And here we're talking both about just in, how to put it, in terms of how many people are actually there. Like we said, 41,000 people is nothing compared to what used to be in Jerusalem and its environs in the time of the first temple, but also in terms of how much it can expand. Because the truth is that the Persians didn't let the Judeans settle in the entirety of the land of Israel, or even in the entirety of what used to be Judah, the kingdom of Judea. They're pretty much in Jerusalem and a very narrow area around it. That's it. So even if more people come, even if they keep giving birth in a high rate, there's a limit, the geographical limit to how much they can expand. So that's definitely true. What do you think about the type of people that are there? Is that different? Sorry?
Basically poor people who were coming, as opposed to a wide spectrum of society that you had before. So you've missed it demographically. Mm-hmm. Socially, it's different.
Yeah, we're not watching the elites coming back. We're watching
professional. You don't have the professional strata that you had before.
Mm-hmm. Definitely true. Any other thoughts before we look and see how the prophets address all of those points? Okay, so let's delve into the text. We talked a bit about Haggai, and Haggai pretty much finishes his mission by first encouraging the people to rebuild, and then once they start rebuilding, encouraging them not to be disheartened by the fact that it's so much less beautiful and glorious. And also, and I'll jump ahead a little bit now, sorry, this is frustrating, by making a point about the lack of sovereignty. Just like he made a promise that one day they will have the gold and the silver to make it as beauteous and in fact more beautiful than before, he makes a similar point about sovereignty. Let's look here. It's in box number 6, the bottom, in chapter 2 of Haggai, verses 20 to 23. And the word of the Lord came to Haggai a second time on the 24th day of the month. Speak to Zerubbabel, the governor of Judah. I am going to shake the heavens and the earth. Again, it's the same image. Something will be shaken. And I will overturn the thrones of kingdoms and destroy the might of the kingdoms of the nations. I will overturn chariots and their drivers. Horses and their riders shall fall, each by the sword of his fellow. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, O my servant Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord, and make you a signet, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. Meaning one day you will have sovereignty. But as we move from Haggai, we're moving to a different prophet who was contemporary with him, who prophesied before and during and after, immediately after the act of rebuilding the temple, and that is Zechariah. And I heard once somebody likens Zechariah to somebody who lives his life looking up with his eyes in the sky. Because while Haggai is very much down to earth, you don't have money, it doesn't matter, do it anyway kind of guy, Zechariah sees visions. The sages compare him to Yechezkel and say that he was Yechezkel's student, because like Yechezkel, who sees all these grand visions of angels and animals and chariots in the sky, Zechariah looks up and sees riders riding, ethereal riders riding, and various specters and all kinds of visions. And while Haggai is deeply aware of the reality of life and how difficult it is, Zechariah seems like he's overflowing with a deep sense of the grandeur of the historical moments. He doesn't see the scarcity, at least not immediately. We will see that he does address the difficulties they're facing, but his first instinct is to see how grand and wonderful and historical that event is. And with that in mind, with that kind of attitude and with that kind of glorious take on the reality around him, it's interesting to see how he responds to a point that one of you made, the point that demographically it's not as robust a settlement as the one they used to have. He has a vision in which he looks up, and let's see here in box number 4 in the bottom, it's his second chapter starting in verse 5. I looked up and I saw a man holding a measuring line. Where are you going? I asked. To measure Jerusalem, he replied, to see how long and wide it is to be. To clarify, this is happening, and I didn't include the verse that dates it, but this is happening between the people's decision to rebuild the temple and long before the completion. So it seems that the person he sees is a literal person, one of the engineers that are preparing the area to be rebuilt. And this is a very kind of pedestrian and prosaic moment in Zechariah's prophecy that's full of visions. He sees an actual engineer actually measuring the land, but of course immediately his high prose style comes through, or high poetry style comes through, and he feels the following. Let's look at verse 7. But the angel who talked with me, the truth is that in Hebrew it says hadover pi, who spoke within me, came forward, and another angel came forward to meet him. The former said to him, run to that young man and tell him, Jerusalem shall be peopled as a city without walls. So many shall be the man and cattle it contains. And I myself, declares the Lord, will be a wall of fire all around it, and I will be a glory inside it. In other words, yes, right now we need to measure it. And right now we're building it. And we know historically that when they rebuilt the city, they built it smaller. They narrowed down the scope of the walls. Probably because they didn't have as many people, they didn't need as much space, it was easier to defend. And as we know from Ezra and Nehemiah, which we'll get to eventually, they had a lot to defend against. The local peoples who were there while the Judeans were in exile were not particularly welcoming and not particularly thrilled with the return of the Judeans. They're building a smaller city. But Zechariah immediately comes and tells them, no, you don't understand. Yeah, it looks small now, but this isn't important. This is not what's happening here. What's happening here is the seed of the kind of greatness that we've never seen before. Jerusalem was never without walls, but eventually it'll be without walls. I have to tell you that as a Jerusalemite from childhood, reading these words is very potent for me. Because Jerusalem, as we know today, is without walls. Yes, there's the walls of the old city, but the new city keeps growing and growing. It can't be held within those walls. There's a certain sense in Zechariah's words that he is watching, and it's as if he's watching this future history happening already in potentiality in the here. And with the same grand style, he deals with another area where the new temple pales in comparison, and that is not just the number of people, but the quality of the people involved. Let's look at the next box 5, and we'll start chapter 3 of Zechariah, and we'll just read a little bit, and then we'll get to the end later. He farther showed me Yehoshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of the Lord, and the accuser, the Satan, the devil, he who has the right to be the prosecutor in God's trials, the accuser standing at his right to accuse him. This is a powerful image. We're watching Yehoshua, the man who is supposed to start the service of God in the new temple, wearing dirty clothes. And sorry, I didn't let's read ahead. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. Sorry. He's standing and he's being accused. Why is he being accused? Verse 2, but the angel of the Lord said to the accuser, the Lord rebuke you, O accuser. May the Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebuke you, for this is a brand plucked from the fire. Ud mutzal me'esh, the way people now describe survivors of the Holocaust. Now, Yehoshua was clothed in filthy garments when he stood before the angel. So only in verse 3, we find out what was the problem that the accuser is talking about in verse 1. I'm sorry, I made a model of it here. We see a man standing in front of God, trying to service God with dirty clothes. And so im is not just dirty, it's dirty with excrement. It's dirty with bodily functions. It's disgusting. It's smelly. It's unpleasant. And with these clothes, he's coming to serve God in the Holy of Holies? How can that be? But the angel of God, Hashem himself, says, no, this is a brand plucked from the fire. In these words in Zechariah, we're hearing not merely a defense of this particular man, Yehoshua, which is a weird defense, because what does it matter? So what that he's a brand plucked from fire? Shouldn't he wear clean clothes anyway? Like, the fact that what does it even mean? So when the sages open it, when the commentators open it, they're putting it in the context of a grand debate that's tearing apart the Jewish people at this moment in history. Because at this moment in history, the Jews have the opportunity to go back and rebuild. And the people who actually are doing it are the poor, are the downtrodden, are those who are in need of opportunities, Are those who intermarry as soon as they come into Israel, intermarry with the local Gentiles. Are those who barely know the laws, who mess up the laws of sacrifice, who mess up everything because they don't know, they're not learned, they're not educated, they barely know what they're doing. Even the best amongst them, the man who's supposed to be the high priest, doesn't know enough to keep his clothes clean when he services God, when he comes in the service of God. And where are the elites? The elites are sitting in Babylon. The elites are not interested. We will see that when we get to Israel and Nehemiah. The elites are happy in their own lives, and they're not interested in coming. And of course, the second that the poor people and the uneducated people are the ones who go to Israel, to Judea, to Yehud, as it's called then, the rich people have all the more reason not to go, because they say, look, it's these, riffraffs. Why would we go there? And this is a debate that's splitting the Jewish people. And we'll come back to this split and its severity at the end of today's lesson. But within this debate, the accuser is echoing what those people who stayed in Babylon, those people who didn't want to dirty their hands with the riffraffs, might be saying. They're saying, why would we want to be part of that? Why would we want to be part of a service of God that's so inappropriate, that's so inaccurate, that's so smelly? Let's put it this way, in the words that Schalia is saying. That's covered in poop, to be quite blunt, in words that my 3-year-old will understand. And what God is saying is, this man, Yeshua, with all his deficiencies, with his lack of education, with his dirty clothes, he is a brand that's plucked from the fire. He is someone who survived the great trauma of exile, and the fact that he is here is meaningful, regardless of his dirty clothes. In fact, as he says moving forward, just a minute, as he says in the same chapter, God says to his attendants in verse 4, take the filthy garments off him, and he said to him, see, I have removed your guilt from you, and you shall be clothed in priestly robes. Then he gave the order, let a pure diadem be placed on his head. And they placed the pure diadem on his head and clothed him in priestly garments as the angel of the Lord stood by. In other words, God himself is saying, yes, they're dirty. Yes, they're uneducated. Yes, they're guilty of all kinds of misdemeanors. I will be the one speaking up for them. I will help them cleanse themselves. In a sense, this echoes something that Haggai said when they started rebuilding. If you look here in box 3, when they're actually starting rebuilding, we're told in verse 12, here in Haggai 1, verse 12, at the end, the people feared the Lord. And then in verse 13, and Haggai, the Lord's messenger, fulfilling the Lord's mission, spoke to the people, I am with you, declared the Lord. And just this sense, the sense of God is with them, gave them power. And then in the next verse, we see then the Lord roused the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, the governor of Yehudah, and they came and set out to work on the house of the Lord of the hosts. God's presence is enough within them to give them the strength to accept the fact that it's a lesser house, to accept the fact that they are lesser people, to accept the fact that they're demographically depleted, and do what they can. And just leave behind the mindset of scarcity, the mindset of everybody busy surviving, the mindset of we can't do it because it's not good enough. God says, I'm with you. I am washing it. I am going to complete it. I am going to shake the heaven and the earth, in Haggai's words, and make it better. You just need to sow the very first seed. I would like to pause here for a second before we continue with the last prophet, but even before that, when we continue a little bit more with Schalia and then move to the last prophet, and ask, does anybody have any questions, any comments, any thoughts they'd like to share?
If I may, when the Young Israel of Brookline was rebuilt after the fire, the remnants of the Sifrei Torah were put in a cornerstone next to the entrance, and the inscription is that Pasuk Gimel of Ud Nitzal Min Ha'esh.
That's very literal and beautiful. Saved from the fire. I think it also captures very beautifully a lot of our history, that so much of our history is surviving the terrible fires of trauma, of loss, of exile, of Holocaust, and taking it and turning it into a seed for a future. Donna, you want to say something? No. Anybody else? I'd like to share with you before we move forward then.
It's also,
Yes.
sorry, it's also very true about nature that forest fires germinate the new trees. There are a lot of trees that depend on the fire in order for them to regrow. And as painful as fire is, it's often the start for a new beginning.
Yeah, I think that we saw a little bit of an echo of that when we saw the prophecies about the destructions. Before the destruction, I think we saw it in Yechezkel, that some of Yechezkel's prophecies of comfort reframed the destruction as a cleansing that will allow something better to happen, instead of just a destruction and just a loss. So here we're seeing the flip side of the same message, that in the moment when they have to rebuild, they have to remind themselves of the immense value of even that small beginning when they compare it to the devastation before that, in a sense. Anybody else? So I'd like to share something before moving forward that I heard in a shiur by Rav Benny Lau from Jerusalem, of Kehilat Ramban Frame, and in fact the founder of the 929 project that we are following with the daily chapters here. He remembered that when he was a young rabbi, before he became a leader of movements, etc., he was called upon, as a lot of other young rabbis, by a rabbi in Israel named Rabbi Druckmann, a man who is extremely sensitive to the needs of the society, and who in the 90s, when the great aliyah, the great immigration from the Soviet Union started, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, Rabbi Druckmann realized the great difficulty on hand. He realized that due to 70 years of Soviet rule and the eradication of religion in the Soviet Union, most people coming, a lot of people coming, if not most, will not be halachically Jewish. They will be of Jewish descent, but not halachically Jewish. And while many other people in Israel treated it as either as not a big deal, if you don't believe in halacha and you're saying, what's a big deal anyway, why care about it? Or as a horrible thing that should never have happened, and why are we letting all these shiksas in, and I'll spare you the rhetoric. Rabbi Druckmann was one of the people who said, these are our people, these are the children of Jews and the grandchildren of Jews, and these are people whose soul is coming from a Jewish source, and we want to embrace them. We want to embrace them fully. Let's make it easy for them. Let's make conversion. Let's find every way we can to make it a more lenient conversion. Convert as many of them as they can so that their children can marry our children without issue. And when Rabbi Druckmann created those special conversion courts, he asked Rabbi Benny Lau, who was then a young rabbi in the South, to come and help him. And when he gathered the group of young rabbis he wanted to work with to run it, he read to them these psukim from Zechariah about the high priest standing with his dirty clothes, and the accuser saying, look at that, why should he be standing here? And God saying, this is a brand plucked from the fire. And he told them, these people from Russia, they are the brands that are plucked from the fire. And do we want to be on the side of the accuser, or do we want to take God's side, the angel's side, and help them join us fully and help restore them to us fully? So there are people who have the gift of, in the historical moment, seeing the potential for greatness and pushing for it, like Zechariah, like Rabbi Druckmann, and may we all be zoche to be like them. But this is not the end of the class. I know this sounds like the ending, right? But it's we're we're actually not quite there yet. If you will excuse me a moment, let's look at the source sheet. Again, jumping down. Schalia also talks about sovereignty. I'm not going to delay on that. I want to, you know what, before I jump to the last prophet, I'd like to say one more thing about Schalia. Unsurprisingly, Schalia's images and Schalia's language were very evocative to the modern Shivat Zion, the Zionist return to Israel in the late 19th century and the 20th century. And even religiously atheistic leaders of the Zionist movement, like David Ben-Gurion, were moved and inspired by Schalia's imagery and Schalia's enthusiasm and his sense of how great the moment is, even when the beginning is humble and dirty and difficult. And in fact, the symbol of the state of Israel, the menorah with the two branches of Hadassim, of Merel, is taken pretty much directly from Schalia. I'm not going to give you the source, I'll leave you to look for it. I just wanted to say it, that Schalia has always been the prophet that people turn to when at a difficult moment they want to have a sense of the grandeur inherent within it that can still unfold moving forward. So we have Haggai and we have Schalia, and we have the difficulty of bringing ourselves to start the temple anew and start a new endeavor and dealing with the ghost of the first temple and its grandeur holding us back. But beginnings have a tendency to be over at some point. And just like any beginning in the world ends, and then we get to the middle, and the middle has its own set of difficulties, so does this stage of the beginning of the rebuilding of the temple. They did it, they rebuilt it, several decades have passed, and now the enthusiasm and the energy that Haggai and Schalia helped awaken as they rebuilt the temple are dwindling. And now routines are already in place and people are working in the temple as a matter of routine. But those promises, the promises of greatness, of sovereignty, of God shaking the earth and the sky and creating us anew and making us wealthy, they didn't come to pass. They're promises for the distant future, but the people are living in the immediate future. And at this point, without all those things they were hoping to see at this point, and still with poverty, and still with lack of sovereignty, and still with all the rich Jews still in Babylon, they're losing some of that enthusiasm. The work that Haggai and Zechariah did to awaken them is losing its purchase. It's losing its effect. And it's at that point that the very last of the prophets, all the prophets in all Jewish history, steps onto the stage. And this prophet is Malachi. And Malachi can be described, and if we want to give him a title, as the prophet who urges people not to give in to a routine. He talks about a lot of different things in his prophecies, but two themes come up strongly. One has to do with the temple, and we will look at it in a second. But the other, which we will not touch upon at length, but it's part and parcel of it, is intermarriage. He's arguing against their attempts to, against their tendency to just marry into the people around them. And to understand what it means, to understand the gravity of that situation, it's important to understand that the people around them objected to the Judean return, objected to the rebuilding of the temple. Even once they already started rebuilding the temple, they had to stop because the locals sent emissaries to Susa, to Shushan, to tell the king that they shouldn't let the Jews build the temple, to come up with all kinds of slanderous stories about the Jews not being loyal to the Persians, etc., etc. And yet, they're intermarrying with them. They don't have enough of a sense of their mission to even care at this point. So even though Malachi is talking about two very different things, about degrading the ritual in the temple, and again, we'll read that in a second, and degrading in their loyalty to their vision, to their peoplehood, to their sense of destiny. It's not just intermarriage. It means that they're also accepting the objections, in a sense, to their presence, to their unique mission there. What he's talking about in both cases is stemming very much from the disheartening feeling of, okay, we came, we tried, and it's not exactly amazing, so why bother? He is the guy who comes at the end of the beginning and says, wait longer, have patience. And let's see what he says exactly when it comes to the ritual. I'm looking at Malachi chapter 1, verse 5 in box number 8 here. Your eyes shall behold it, and you shall declare, great is the Lord beyond the borders of Israel. A son should honor his father, and a slave his master. Now if I am a father, where is the honor due me? And if I am a master, where is the reverence due me? Said the Lord of hosts to you, O priests, who scorn my name. But you ask, how have we scorned your name? You offer defiled food on my altar. But you ask, how have we defiled you? By saying, the table of the Lord can be treated with scorn. So we already see that Malachi's style is much more circuitous. He's like kind of going like this in his sentences form. We don't have time to read a lot of him. This is more of a sampling of each of those three. But he's portraying a pretty ugly picture, where if in the beginning we could say that the high priest wearing dirty clothes, it's because he just came from this trauma of exile and he's doing his best and it can be forgiven. Decades in, it's a little harder to forgive people disregarding the ritual, people bringing bad offerings, people being lax in all matters of their identity. And it's at this point that Malachi comes and says, yes, it's hard. Yes, things are not great yet, but you need to hold on. And I have to say that I personally find it very poignant right now, because back in March, when we had to go home and close our door and move to Zoom, for example, there's all this energy of, this is a crisis, I have to rise to the challenge, I have to make it happen. And then it was Pesach, and then it was Shavuot, and now we passed Tisha B'Av, and now we're talking about doing Zoom high holiday services for those who do it, or high holidays at home for those who don't, and second waves and whatnot, and all that energy from the beginning has dwindled, but the promise of a better future is not quite here yet. I mean, it's better in some regards. I'm not going to say no, but we're not there. We're still on the road. And it's at that moment that I need someone like Malachi to tell me, hold on, you still have to keep rising to the challenge, and it will get better, but you can't just let go. You can't just let up. And my question to you is, seeing as it's such an important moment in Jewish history, seeing as the promises are not fulfilled yet, as we're still 100 years or so away from Jewish sovereignty in terms of the history of the Second Temple, and long before they were rich enough to make it beautiful, and long before they were safe enough to develop new elites and cultivate learning and all those things that they're missing at that point. Seeing as all those things are still to come, why is Malachi the last prophet? Why are there not other prophets to come and encourage them and help them until they reach all those goals, and then warn them when they start straying and telling them the destruction will come, the destruction will come? Why? Why are we left with this haunting note in Malachi's words of, yes, yes, I know it's hard, but keep pushing. Why can't we move a little further? Why can't God's prophets walk with us and guide us as we move forward into those new beginnings, into those promised futures? Why? And there's many answers, and to finish today's class, I'll explore some of them, but I'd like to hear from you. What does it mean to you? Why do you think the story of prophecy ends here? There's no right or wrong answer.
We have to take more responsibility for ourselves.
Why? Why at this point? I'll specify what I mean. Why is it more important to take more responsibility here than it was at any point during the first temple, for example?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Me neither. I don't have an answer. It's not like there's a right answer. Let's look and see what the Gemara says about it. And let's look at the last box. I'm going to start I'm in box number 9, but I'm starting with the second source, which is from Sanhedrin. Since Shmuel, never mind. I'm going to start from the bold. Okay, I'm starting just in the bold. It's taking from Sepharia. The bold is a translation of the Aramaic, and then everything that's not in bold is added. It's like added from the Steinsaltz interpretation. But I'll start straight from the bold here. It's from the Sanhedrin, the Bavli Sanhedrin 11a. The sages taught, after the last of the prophets, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, died, the divine spirit of prophetic revelation departed from the Jewish people. But nevertheless, they were still utilizing a divine voice, which they heard as a kind of echo of prophecy. One time, a group of sages were reclining in the loft of the house of Uriah in Yericho, and a divine voice was bestowed upon them from the heavens, saying, "There is one here who is fit for the divine presence to rest upon him, as it rested upon Moshe our teacher, but his generation is not deserving of this distinction." The sages set their eyes upon Hillel the elder, trusting that he was the one indicated by the divine voice. And when he died, the sages said about him, "Alas, the pious man, alas, the humble man, a disciple of Israel." What do you think it means that there's a person who's deserving of being a prophet, but the generation isn't deserving? What can we make of it? Why is the prophecy dependent on the generation, in your opinion? Any thoughts?
They need to be able to respond.
What does that mean? I'm sorry, can you elaborate?
Well, if the prophet is going to urge them to do something, then the people have to have it within themselves to be able to respond to the request, or to respond to the prophecy, and to be able to move on ahead. It reminds me in a general way of parenting, that you can parent so far, and then your kid needs to move on and become an adult and take responsibility. And even though you're there in the background, or you're there in the shadows, or you're more or less active and involved, there comes a point when the kid needs to be the adult and to take the reins and go.
So I'm sorry, let me see if I understand what you're saying. You're saying that for there to be a prophet, there need to be people who will listen to him. For a parent to do his job, there need to be kids who listen to him.
And you can parent for a certain amount of time, and then your ability to parent sort of ends, and the kid needs to move on and take with them what they've been given and assimilate it and work with it and create their own life.
So you're saying you're saying 2 points. You're saying one about why a generation is why the generation needs to be worthy, and you're also saying why maybe the prophecy ends here, because they hit the watershed moment, and now it's time for them to, kind of like Deborah was saying. So in regard to your second point, I want to say that according to some of the commentators, really the prophecy was supposed to end with the first temple. The watershed moment is not here. The watershed moment was at the end of the first temple. And the second temple is already more of a enterprise that the people are taking out of their own volition. And that's the moment when they assume adulthood, in a sense, as a people. And the prophecies of Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, according to those commentators, are really a remnant, because those were prophets that saw the first temple, so they're still able to prophesy, but really the source of their inspiration is not the moment they're in. They're more like the aftermath, the echoes, in a sense, of the last echo of the great source. Some commentators even say that they were students of Yechezkel, and really they learned these prophecies from Yechezkel. Yechezkel was the one who saw them and they just spoke them. There's all kinds of theories like that. And that would definitely fit with what both of you were saying about the watershed moment.
And
in regard to your, sorry, yes? You're muted, Naomi.
that would also mean that they're more like a grandparent type figure.
Perhaps.
If you're using a parent-child grandparent.
In regard to your first point about the generation, I would argue, you say that the generation needs to be able to listen to the prophet. We saw in the past that a lot of generations didn't listen. So I'm not sure that's a good parameter for judging it. Does anybody else have another suggestion as to how you decide whether a generation is worthy of a prophet or not? What's the point? So, you know what, let's look at the other source I have here. It's from a different part in the Bavli, from Masechet Yoma, and it's a hard one to read. I'm not gonna lie, it's a painful and difficult one to read, but let's read through it anyway because I think it gives us a very interesting insight. Reish Lakish was swimming in the Jordan. Sorry, Masechet Yoma, page 9, second 9b. Reish Lakish was swimming in the Jordan River when Rabba Bar Chana came and gave him a hand to help him up. Reish Lakish was from Israel, and Rav Bar Chana was from Bavel. Reish Lakish said to him, "My God, I hate."
Rachel, I think we lost your sound.
She lost her connection.
She's frozen.
Yeah, I'm going to send her a text.
She lost her connection.
Lost my thunder here. Thank you for waiting. I appreciate your patience. Rewind for a second.
You were in Yoma.
Thank you. Yoma. So let's go back to this. Oh, Ilana, I need you to enable thy screen share.
Yes. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, it should be set.
Okay. Yeah, I have it. Thank you. No, just a minute. Everything in my computer has now been changed. Sorry. It's a little alarming. Here. Reish Lakish was swimming in the Jordan River when Rabba Bar Chana came and gave him a hand to help him out. Reish Lakish said to him, "My God, I hate you Babylonians. As it is written, if she be a wall, we will build a silver turret upon her. If she be a door, we will cover her with boards of cedar." So I hope you share my sense of confusion at reading that. What has hating the Babylonians to do with this quote from the Song of Songs about how if she's a wall, we'll build a silver turret, and if she's a door, we will cover her with boards of cedar? What is it to do with anything? And so the sages explain, had you, that is the Babylonians, rendered yourself a solid block like a wall, and all ascended to Eretz Israel in the days of Isra, you would have been likened to silver, which rot does not infest. Now, and I'm just reading the bold now that you ascended like doors, and only some of you came to Eretz Israel, you are likened to cedar, which rot infests, and you merit experiencing only partial revelation of the divine presence. And the Gemara goes on to say that, according to Reish Lakish and other rabbis, this is why we no longer hear prophecy, but rather only echoes of prophecy, because not everybody came to Israel at the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. So let's look at it a little bit deeper, because what we're hearing here is not merely a Zionist manifesto of everybody has to make Aliyah. What we're hearing here is a statement that cuts into the reality of the Jewish people at the time. Until the exile, let's put it this way, until the exile of the northern kingdom, all the Israelites were in Israel. With the loss of the 10 Shvatim, the 10 tribes, we lost, at least for now, we remain in a state of loss, a large part of our people. And yet, whoever was in the kingdom of Judea was there. From the moment of the Babylonian exile forward, there was never a reality, till this day, when there was one center that had all the Jews in it. And again, I have to exclude the Israelite kingdom, which we lost already before that. But even just within the frame of the Judean kingdom, from the moment the Babylonians started the first exile, the exile that Yechezkel went with, the exile before the destruction, there was never a reality where all the Jews were in one place. There was never a reality where all the Jews were centered even around one place in a clear way. There was the Babylonian exile that was rich and powerful. There were the riffraffs who went back to Israel to build the temple. Slowly the riffraffs, as the prophets Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi promised, did grow in esteem and establish a powerful center. But even at the height of the center, they were never the only ones. There are always other centers in other places. There was often acrimony between them. We know about the Elephantine temple that had correspondence between a temple in an island on the Nile and the temple in Jerusalem, comparing notes about ritual. So that's a rather amicable reality. And we have other less amicable relationships. In other words, with the exile, with the destruction of the first temple, we have lost more than sovereignty, more than temple, more than the house of David as our kings. We lost the reality where all of us were basically sharing a certain texture of life. There's a lot of beauty in our current reality. There's a lot of, and I'm saying that sitting here in Boston with you and about to go back to Israel, and I can say that my 3 years here were a great exposed me to a lot of the beauty of Jewish life in America. And I'm grateful and honored, and I cherish that time and what it taught me. And this is our reality. This is not a reality we're going to change anytime soon. The fact is, we live different lives and in different places. And as with everything in life, we can choose to see this reality as a huge tragedy, or to make the best of it and learn from each other and develop, since we're all developing in different circumstances, to enrich each other and ourselves through interaction. And I hope that we will continue to do so here and elsewhere. But the fact is that we're no longer living what can be described as one life. And perhaps this is one way to look at the statement that the generations are no longer worthy of a prophet. Perhaps a prophet can only come to a people who are sharing a certain reality, a certain basic reality. And as our reality is fractured, we can no longer have that level of clarity of God's voice anymore. Because for us to have a level of clarity of God's voice, we have to stand together. And since we're separated by geography, and more than that, by our experiences, by our profound experiences of life that are different in different circumstances, all we can have is our own initiative. As Naomi said, we're ascending into our adulthood as a people at this moment in history. And a sense of the divine will, an echo, a bat kol, as the Gemara says. And now, lo b'shamayim, it's no longer in the sky. It's now in our hands, as the sages say, to argue over, to interpret, to decide, to create. It opens the door to immense creativity, as we will see in the generations of the Second Temple and forward. But all of that is predicated on this sudden multiplicity of voices and experiences. That also means that we can no longer really hear the one voice of God. This is only an interpretation. There's many other arguments and many other ways to look at it. As I am facing my own return to Israel, as I am facing saying goodbye to all my new friends and community here in Boston, I definitely want to look at the bright side of our different experiences and how we can enrich each other and ourselves through our interaction. And with that in mind, I want to thank you, all of you, and I want to thank Ma'ayan, and I want to thank you, Ilana, for being my partners in this journey and for enriching me and teaching me and giving me opportunities to learn with you. And I hope to continue doing it even when our differences are geographical as well. Thank you.
Rachel, what will you